Welcome, everybody. It's Kathy Arbor here, and this is my second episode of Watercolor from the beginning, a revisiting of watercolor for beginners. And I hope you're having all a fantastic day and you're enjoying the sunshine if you have it. We have some beautiful sun today, which is nice. If you were at the first one, I gave you the first bit of information about paper, brushes, paint, and we started doing some practice on the Strathmore watercolor paper is what I'm recommending for people that are just starting out. It's 140 pound, and this is what it is. Well, actually, you guys, this is backwards for you. Are you seeing this backwards? Hey, Lena, are you seeing the words backwards? Just give me a heads up. Might have to mirror this for you. No, I see it right. Okay, it's just me then. Okay, so that's the brown one, the Strathmore. And it's good enough for practicing on. Hey, Barb, good to see you. So I even use this for finished pieces. I find it's fine. And if you can work on this one, you can work on any other one, basically. It's not that difficult. So I usually get the bigger ones because if you're cutting them down, it's a little less expensive. Instead of getting a bunch of different sizes, I just get the biggest one they have and cut it down myself. A lot of times, too, you will see Strathmore on sale. I got mine, gosh, years ago, and it was $5 a pack back then. But Michael's gets new batches every so often, so they sell off their old stock. And you'll find time and time again, sales here and there, different places. Your Hobby Lobby will carry it for a cheaper price. I haven't looked on Amazon. You might be able to find it fairly cheap on Amazon. So if you want to get some of that, if you're just starting out, that's most economical for you instead of spending a huge amount of money for paper when you're just practicing. You don't need the expensive paper. And I'm using my palette, and this is Daniel Smith Holbein Core, Winsor & Newton. There's a few other odds and sods in there too. Get the paint that you are attracted to for just starting out. You don't need to get a whole slew of them. If you want to go with tube paints or pan paints, maybe an artist grade, just get a few colors. I would probably recommend a green, a red, a blue, and a yellow to start off with. Now you can make green out of the blue and yellow. If you just want to go with the three, that's good too. Also, another one is burnt umber, just to mix your colors to be darker or whatever. Hey, Nancy, Carol, good to see you. So I did give you some suggestions to work on last week for the different exercises, I guess, just to get used to water amounts in your brush and to practice doing some washes, see how smooth you can get it. And this is a cold press paper that I'm working on. It's the easiest to work on. You can get hot pressed if you find later that you're going to be doing more illustrative style watercolor, you might want to go to the hot press. Some people absolutely hate hot press. It's not very good for wet into wet because the water tends to bead on the top for a long time and it takes a while for it to dry. So if you want to try it, you can get a small pack and just give it a try. This is good for watercolor, and if you're going to do any pen sketching on it or sketching first and then the watercolor, these are great. But if you get just a regular watercolor, there's not a whole lot of texture to it. Now they both have, all watercolor papers have two sides. I don't know if I can, you can see the texture on one side, and the other side is a little bit smoother. So you can use either side, really. So whatever side you want to use. Especially when you're practicing. The rougher side will hold pigments more because it's got the little grooves in it, so it sits down in those grooves. So what I did after the stream is, if you remember, you can go back to the first stream and watch that if you want. It's not a very long one. It's about an hour. I'm trying to keep these a little bit shorter than what I typically do in my streams. Now this was from a stencil, so I outlined the stencil and then I tried to do as many washes to get a fairly smooth gradient on there. So I didn't want a whole lot of difference. This was the first one. This is hot press paper. So you can see it's kind of hard to get a smooth wash to it. You really have to practice. This one's not bad. This one was wet into wet, and you can see it's a little more mottled looking. This one here, too much water on the brush causes the pigment not to stay where it is. It kind of floats around. That was a wet on wet in cold press paper, so it still moves around quite a bit. So we're going to be playing with this today, the different effects you can get with wet on wet. And here's some gradients. So I wanted you to try to do a few gradient washes using your stencils, or you can draw circles, squares, whatever you want to do. I just thought it was a little bit different instead of just the plain old swatches that you typically do in watercolor. That was another different gradients into one color and another color. So today we're going to play with different washes of a couple different colors. So wet into wet. Now you don't have to, when you're first starting out, you don't have to draw circles or whatever. We'll do a little exercise later on in this stream to show you some practice things to do. Right now I want you just to play and find out how wet and wet reacts. And all paints are different. So if you want to just wet, say, I'm just going to put a square here. And I've got it fairly wet. Let's see, there. You can see it's fairly wet. It's glistening. So you want to let it soak a little bit, but you don't want to let it dry. Then you take a color. Let's use magenta today. And I did wet my paint before I came on. Now magenta, if I just touch the wet areas in my paint, you just get dots. Now some of these, some paints really what they call bloom. They just explode and fan out. Let's see where we can get one. Try this yellow. I have a yellow here. See how much more that the yellow spreads. Then it's like instant. It instantly spreads. A lot more than the magenta. So I want you to get out your paints and test your pigments because they're all different. Play with it. See what kind of blooms you can get. You might want to just go into a color and do just an area. See what it does. Then we'll get maybe a blue here. Let's put blue dot and see what it does. See how it pushed the pigment from the magenta away. It's a very blooming paint. So all your paints are a little different. Now, I like blooms in certain things, not all stuff, but I do really love the look of blooms. So once this dries, you're going to see some rings of color. You're going to see the bloom mix with the magenta and the blue, which will make a purple. Now, if you like to just leave them, or you can take up this by just taking a damp brush and dipping the tip in to where it's pooling and soak that up. So we'll let that one dry. So it's a good exercise to just take some colors. What if we just do a nice wet into dry color to start off with? And let's see, we add a nice yellow to that, maybe. So this will be now wet into wet. So we'll touch it. And you can see how the yellow has pushed some of that bright red out of the way. It's almost a orangey red. So you can just play with your colors to see how the water reacts. If you want to try putting some colors together to see what you get, you can do that too. What are we going to get with red and green? They're complementary colors, so what is it going to do? I have a lot of water. Hey Janice, can't stay. We'll be watching replay and last week, which I missed. Practicing watercolor all the time. Need it. Oh, awesome. Yep, the lessons will be up. We're just playing with color and water amounts right now to see what they do, how do they react with the paint. So you can either leave this puddle and let it dry like that. Now, because there's a lot of water there, you're going to get some blooms, because where the water is very, very concentrated, it's going to dry last, and therefore it blooms into the drier areas. Okay, we'll do one more here. Another, just a bit of water. And let's put some of this color in here. And maybe some red. So it just bleeds out the more water that's on your paper. Just play with some color combinations and see how they react to each other. It's a great fun. I'll put that aside here. Then I want to show you, let's do a square again, but this time I'm going to leave it, and I'm going to do another square here, 2 squares. And I'm going to leave those 2 squares for a minute to let it soak in. This is cold press paper that we're working on. So when you start to see the real shine, see how shiny it is? When that real shine starts to go a little bit more matte, then we're going to place some paint on it and see how it reacts. The different drying time of the paper and paint, and if you're going to paint on something that's drier than what you have in your brush, this is when it causes very large blooms. So you can fix up papers. Say you've got a different, it's not as even as you like it, and you just did it, you still have a bit of time to fix it. But once it starts to dry, you can't. You have to leave it alone. So they're still starting to dry there. This one, it's kind of patchy. Let's get some blue. This one's, I think, got more water on it. Well, let's go on this one. And because I have a lot of water on my brush, and it's not completely dry yet, it hasn't gone matte in color, or not color, in texture, you can still put paint. But see, when you have a lot of water, how your pigment pools? That's too much water on your brush. If you want a more even looking color, you need to figure out how much pigment you have and how much water you have on your brush. Let's see, we'll do this one here. And when you're working wet into wet, it's very difficult to get a real even pigment load. It can be done, but you kind of have to wet your brush or dry your brush off a little bit. Because this is still wet, I can go over top. Around the edges. And then stop. Don't try and do it too many times because you'll end up messing it up. So try playing with the water just to see how much to lay down on your paper itself. How long do you want to wait for it to dry before you add to it? And also, surprisingly, when you think it's dry and you go to paint right up next to it and it's not completely dry, the pigment from your brush is going to rush into that area. So that's why artists will paint kind of all the way around their painting that they're doing. They don't stay in one spot. They'll go to different spots, especially in botanical illustrations, because they don't want that pigment to touch those areas that may be still wet a little bit or damp even. So if you see this here, there's no shine on this one, but you just have to put your hand on it. Just put the back of your hand on it, and if it feels cold, it's still damp. So stay away from it, or you'll end up with blooms. Or maybe that's what you want. Blooms can also be awesome in landscapes. You can use them as a landscape for the bushes or trees, that type of thing. So you purposely put them in. It's more of an intuitive type of painting, but it can really look awesome. I'll be showing you more about that in upcoming videos when we start doing actual scenes or watercolor landscapes. We'll be doing flowers, faces, all kinds of stuff. All right, so play with that. See how light you can get. Play with your pigment load on your brush. See if you can do a gradient wash. So gradient wash, you want a fairly loaded brush with lots of pigment. And you want to start from the top in a very deep pigment. Stop about a quarter way down from where you're going to be. Put some new water on your brush, and then I didn't put my paintbrush in any more pigment. Then I just take my brush with new water and gradually bring it down to so faint you can hardly tell it's got any kind of pigment in it. Try doing some of these. These are really important to get used to in all areas of watercolor painting. Okay, I'll put that aside. All right, now, when we're watercoloring, you'll find times where you're doing you're doing a gradation, say in a petal of a flower. So you have this very intense color, and then you want to bring it down into a very faint gradation. What you do is you take your paintbrush, dip it in clean water, and start applying that clean water where you want that gradation to be. Now you can also take away some if you find you got too much with your damp brush. Because it's still wet, I can still go back into it and play with it a little bit. Once it starts drying, you want to stay away from it. Also, sometimes you don't want a hard edge. A hard edge is this here, how it just stops. So what you want to do is you can take your clean brush, start back here. Don't start in the painted area. Start back. Put some of this wet from your brush on it, and then gradually work up to the edge, and then just touch the edge. And it'll very slowly fuzz out. Now, if you want a little bit more color, if you want it really what they call loose watercolor, then you can add a very light mix to your brush of that color and then come back into it. And then just so when that dries, it'll be more foggy looking. So there's a little bit more pigment there, but not a whole lot. Now you can also do this wet into wet. So while this is really wet, you could add a whole lot of water to the one side. So let's try that. So we're going to make, say, a leaf. Clean water. I got a lot of paint on there. So it's going to really bleed as soon as I touch it. So whatever area you want to bleed out, then you can bleed it out. So you just have to play with it. You can take your brush and sop up some of that. If you want to bring it out further, you can just add clean water around it to wherever you want it to bleed out to. You can also tip it. If it's on the flat, if you're painting on the flat, see how that's bleeding out now? So you can either leave it or you could disperse it, because this is a very wet area, so I'm still able to do that. If it was drying, no, I could not do that because it would bloom. Thanks, Lena. So play with things. Do hard lines and faded lines. Have 2 containers of water. So when you're cleaning your brush, use one. And try to keep your other one as clean as possible for when you're adding water to your pigments. So you could do lines if you want. Practice some lines. Maybe you want to add some of that blue onto this. This is a real pigmented orange. But you can go just play with it, see what you get. Got some dots. More blue. This blue is very strong, so it's going to push that orange back. If you don't want it going too far, you just take your drier brush and go in it. Don't play with it too much, because then the more you play, the more you muddy it. Yeah, isn't that a pretty orange? Okay. So the next I thought would be kind of fun to try. I have a stencil. What is that one? It's from this one. And this is a Crafter's Workshop, and it's number 488. And I just traced around the letters art. You can just do some letters if you have any stencils that you can, bigger stencils. You want them fairly big to do this. What we're going to do is we're going to start adding colors to all of these and seeing what kind of color combination we can get. So I'm just going to add water to the inside of this A. I'm just going to go halfway down, I think, right now, because I know it's going to start drying fairly quickly because I have my heat on. And then we'll see what color combinations we can get. So I think I'm going to start with this magenta color. And I'm just going to wash in a bit, a little bit darker. And wherever you put the water, that's where the paint's going to go. It won't go anywhere where you haven't put water. And I think I'm going to put some blue. And I'm just going to add some blue in here and see what it does. Maybe a little bit more pigment to it. Then I'm going to do some yellow. Now, there's no more water here, so I'm going to put this yellow on dry. And wherever I touch the white or the wet paint with my yellow, it's going to seep into those areas. Let's do some more of that blue, I think. And this is still wet into dry. But I'm just going to nudge it into that yellow. And maybe some of that magenta we were using on the bottom here. And this is going to be also wet on dry. We'll see if how much it moves into that existing area that was painted. Some more yellow. And this time I'm going to take some of that blue and I'm going to dip it in the yellow and see what we can get out of that. Should be a neat green once it's dry. And maybe we'll take that magenta into the top here. So just play with it. See what you can, see what happens when you add stuff. So wet into wet, wet onto dry, but touching the edges of the other paints. So let's try this one all wet into wet. See the difference. And the other one we'll do all wet into dry. So I'm just doing the top part of the R here. Fair amount of water on there. And this time use 3 different colors. So this time I'm going to use green. And I'm going to use kind of an ochre color. So I still have a wet area. This is still pretty wet. And I'm just touching, not even painting really. I'm just touching. Then maybe some purple. I have a really nice dioxazine purple here. We're going to do wet. Almost forgot. Okay, let's wet this area. And this also helps you with brush work as far as staying within the lines, especially if you plan on doing some illustrative type, like botanicals or that type of thing. You do need to have a pretty good steady hand for doing certain areas that are very tiny. All right, so we need one more color. See, green. Let's do an orange. Nice orange. This isn't moving that much. Take some of that gold again. Add it down. Look how it moves that. Just pushes it. Some of that green. Just add a little bit around here. And just touching. See what you can do. And maybe some more green down here. Oh, I didn't wet that. So wet this area here. Now put some green in. I'll put some green in here. So I have less concentrated pigment in this part. It's very concentrated up here. And maybe some more of that orange. Some yellow. That yellow just absolutely travels like crazy. Okay. And this one we're going to do all wet into dry. So this one, let's see. There's a Payne's Gray here. Let's start off with that. Wet into dry, and then we'll add something on it. Maybe you want to add a little bit more water to it. Play with your pigment load also. What if we put some aqua? Let's see what it does. So if we just barely touch the edge, it does push that Payne's Gray away a little bit. You can see it starting to bleed into it. And that also depends on how much water you have on your brush. So I just dab a few dots, see what that does. And then color. Yellow or orange or red? Let's do a red, see what happens. So it's still wet. And again, I go real close to the edge here and touch. See how it's blooming into that teal? There's a lot of pigment on this brush. You might even put a few dots up here. We take some of that off. Less watery. Now let's put a bit of that teal color, do some dots down here, see what it does with the red. Mix. What color does it mix with? It's still wet, so I can still put that in. Okay, we'll let that dry. I'll let you take a look, and we'll see how. So you can even let some of those drips go into the colors if you want. So we'll see how much that fades also. All right. Now this is kind of a different way of doing. You could do this for swatches or whatever. I've got these Fisker templates. What I'm going to do, so I'm going to take probably this one right here, and I want to take my pencil, and I'm going to draw 3 of these ovals. If you have circles, you can do circles, whatever you want. And I want them fairly close to each other, but not touching. Then I want you to take 3 colors. So I think I'm going to stick with primary. So we're going to go with this red that I have here. And I'm going to paint in this red. And I want you to try and get it as even a coat as possible. And try to get your edges done fairly good. You can turn your paper around if it's easier. And just dab up any extra paint. You don't want blooms. Okay. The next one we'll do yellow. And then blue. So I'm going to use cerulean here. Make sure I have a clean brush. So don't go over your things too much, because as it dries, you're going to mess up that evenness. Okay. Then I want you to let that dry a little bit. Now you could go on to another paper. I've just got like little 6x6. I'm going to let this dry, and I'm going to do the same thing, but with 3 other different colors. So by the time I'm done this one, it should be dry with the other one. So again, I want to mark my paper, do the 3 circles. Now this time I'm going to go with your secondary colors. So whatever your yellow and red would make would be orange. So I'm going to take this orange here. And use the correct size brush for what size you're using. Don't use a great big huge brush if your areas are very, very small. And the same with, don't use a real tiny brush. If you use a real tiny brush in a large area, you're going to get a lot of uneven paint. Okay, so we have yellow and blue, which makes green. So I'm going to take a nice green here. It's a bit of a light green, but it should do. It's good practice to do these. You can do them with any kind of shape. You don't have to use this shape. I just thought it would be a little more interesting. This will kind of be a flower in the end. And then blue and red make purple. We'll get a nice purple here. I thought I had purple. I'll mix it over here. This also helps you with your water amounts and paint and pigment load. So it's not a really opaque coverage, it's semi-transparent. So you're still going to be able to see the paper below. All right, so we'll let that dry and we'll come back to this one that we did. Now I'm just gonna, yeah, it's pretty almost dry, so it's dry enough that I can draw on it. So now what I want you to do is that same template that I was using, I want to cross over the blue and the red. So do that with all of them. So you're crossing over the 2 colors. You don't want to cross over the, try and get it in the center if you can. That one was apart just a bit too much. Oh well, we'll get there. Okay, and now what I want to do is I want to take the red color that we used and I'm going to put it over here, and I want it to be a little bit more watered down than your original one. So take your water, take some of that red that you had on your palette, dab it a bit on your cloth, and now I want you to go over your blue and your yellow in those areas. As it's a little bit too late. And this is how we do a glaze. And then the yellow, I want to go over here. So we take some of that yellow, water down, and go over this one. Gonna need a little bit more. Oh, I just smudged it. Now I want to take the blue one and go over top of that. So we're using the same colors but overlapping in certain areas, and it's a little bit lighter than your original application of the first ones. Okay. Then you kind of get an idea of what your colors will look like on top of each other. And every single color that you have will be different. So every type of yellow will be different with that same blue. So if you want to, you can also do just that one blue and try different yellows on top of it. So you could actually do a line. So I got another template here. So if you take So if I take, say I was just going to do this blue. And I do the main rectangle in all blue. And do a fairly even wash. So you may want to, and go all the way down. Let that dry. And then you can, whatever, how many yellows you have, you can take out of your, so I have one, two, kind of a yellowy gold there. I'm just going to clean this one up because it's got a lot of green in it right now. There. So I have right here, this is a cool green, and this is a warm green, because this green has a tendency to go towards the green side of the color wheel. And this one is going towards the red side of the color wheel. So more of the hotter colors. Your hotter colors are your yellows, your oranges, and your reds. But your yellow, orange, and reds also can go towards the cool colors. I wish I had my, I haven't got my color wheel here. Your color wheel, if you cut it in half, or a rainbow, you cut it in half, you'll see where half the wheel is warm and half of the wheel is cool. The cooler side is on the blues and the green side, and the other side is the warm side, which is in the reds, oranges, and yellows. So if you play with one color, so this blue is kind of it's almost neutral because it's your primary. This is where the blue starts from, and this is more of a cayenne blue, this cerulean, and the cerulean is, or the cayenne is what they use for printing. So it's your base blue that they use as the primary blue. So I want to make sure that this dries first, because I don't want to mix it, because it'll just be filled with bloom. So I'm going to put this aside, and we're going to play with this one. So this one already has the secondary colors in it. So the yellow and the red made the orange, the blue and the yellow made the green, and the yellow and the red and the blue made the purple. Now, instead of just adding the same ones to this, now you could do that. If you wanted to add blue to, or orange to this color, you could do that and see what you get. You'll find that most of them will be on an earthy side, more brownish tones, warm tones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my primary colors back to here and see what they make. And they'll be either a warm color or a cooler color, depending on what shades I use. So if I used, get a Kleenex, that one's all wet. So if I used a red that we used in the beginning, and I'm going to water it down because I want to be able to see through it. And we put it over top of these two. I guess I better put my stencil on top. This time I'm going to put it the other way so I can get more color combination. So I'm going to put it like this instead. And this is a great practice to do with your paints, just to see what colors you're going to get. And it's fun, looks pretty. You could use them afterwards if you wanted to, make them into flowers. You could do this for just seeing how light a mix you can make with that one specific color also. Okay, so we're going to do this one with the red. And it's a lighter. It doesn't have as much pigment. It's watered down. So it's more like a glaze than, and glazes can be different amounts of pigment load, depending on what you're doing. This one will do a green. That one was pretty light. Add a little bit more pigment to it. Okay, and then that one is the purple. So now it's over here. Purple's very, very strong color. Very strong staining pigment. But done in the right consistency between pigment and water, it's a great shadowing color, depending on what you're doing. It's used as a shadow color that's reflective. Anything that goes through is usually on a warmer side than the ones that are reflected off of something. Okay, there's what we get. So see how we get these browns, these more earthy tones with the secondary colors. And there's the other one. So you get your green, your purple, your orange. That's another green one, another purple one. But they will change each time you use a different shade of whatever color you're going to be using. Each yellow, each green, and so on ends up with different pigments in them. And you can find out what the pigments are. Excuse me. On the sides of the tubes, there'll be letters and then some numbers, and those are the pigment numbers. If you're into that. Some people, it doesn't matter to them, but some people it's very important. You can really tell how transparent watercolor. Yes, you could also do a swatch of black marker over it too, just to see if it's more opaque than transparent. Okay, so we were gonna do some. I should have clean water. Just hold on for this. When you're doing light colors like yellow and lighter shades, you should have clean water. So we have this yellow here, and I should wipe this off. It's not too contaminated. And I'm just going to do the whole area in this yellow shade. Oh, that was loud. Okay. And then you could right up here write the color. So what is this? They're all in there tight. This one is Winsor & Newton Winsor Yellow. And the next one is get it out. This is Core Hensa Yellow. And we'll get this one out. This one is Core Indian Yellow. So we're using all three of these to see what it does to that cerulean blue color. So this is, okay, we already did Winsor Newton. This one is the Core Hensa Yellow Medium. And this is a little on the warmer side. And then Indian Yellow by Core. Just even warmer. All right. So there's three yellows over the blue. So you can see how the green shows up. And this will be different once it's dry. They always are much lighter when dry. The only ones that don't fade a whole lot are the Core. They have a special ingredient or something in their paints that stop the fading of the color once they're dry. That's one of the reasons why I really like Core. You can really tell how to, okay. So if you want to play with some stencils and do this type of work just to see what colors you get, you can also, you don't have to just use this type of thing. You could just make some blots too. So if I took this, let's see, we'll go back to this cerulean blue. And maybe I just wanted to see what it looks like if I added some of that yellow, the Winsor Newton yellow. Then you could take the Winsor Newton yellow and add it to your palette. And then take cerulean blue, just a touch of it, and then mix it together. See what color you get. So there's the two mixed together. Let's try a little deeper. That's the color you get. So this way, if you want to, you could do swatches of one color by adding different blues. Now, a lot of artists, before they start doing, say, an illustration, will actually go ahead and do swatches to see if they can make a certain color and then load their palette beforehand. Because once you get going in a certain type of watercolor, you don't have time to find a color, to make a color. You have to use it right away. So you may as well get the base colors mixed up ahead of time, and then you can go ahead and paint. Okay. So I think that's it for today. I hope you give this a try and play with your paint, see what colors you can get, see how even a texture you can get. You can play with your color wheel by adding these circles on top of each other. You get different results. As you can see, one secondary, and then there's the primary, and how the tonal value is very, very different, which is has to do with a lot of composition and how well your painting's going to look. So if you want to give this a try, just cut up a bunch of 6x6 papers. You can label them whatever with the video you saw, and then label what colors you use so you can go back and refer to it. But it's a great way of getting to know your paints and getting to know your water versus pigment load on your brush. So give this a try, and next week we will start doing brush strokes. So making up some probably floral, landscape, that type of thing. Maybe we'll start a little mini landscape, something simple. So hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week. And for those that are into mixed media, I will be on Thursday, and I'll be finishing up that Art Nouveau painting that I started. I didn't finish it because I had some people inquiring about watching me finish it. So I thought I may as well just leave it and finish it on stream. Venture into something else. So till Thursday, see you in a couple days, and stay creative, everybody. Get that sketchbook out, do some sketches, and maybe some light watercolor washes. Just get started. That's the main thing. Start. You can't improve unless you practice. So have a great day, everybody, and we'll see you on Thursday. Bye for now.